Hey everybody, it's Emily from Life So Savory, and today I'm going to show you how to make an adorable little skirt. Actually, you can make it in any size that you want. As you see, I've brought two examples here, one that I made for my daughter and one that I've made for myself. The free sewing pattern is available on the website for both versions, but today I'm going to walk you through making one of the smaller sizes. So I've cut out some really pretty fabric here for my skirt, and I've done just a little bit of preparation, but we're going to assemble the rest of it here together. So I prepared a little pocket. I have my waistband cut. I have a front, and we have a front left and a front right. They should be cut in opposites or in mirror. And then I have the back piece. Okay, so you will determine which size you need based on your hip and your waist measurement, and then you can cut that out based on there. And make sure when you're cutting, if you're using a plaid fabric like this, that your lines are really straight, especially if you're folding, and then if you want to try and match when you're putting your pieces together, that you think about all that. And usually you want to get just a little bit extra fabric, 1/4 to 1/2 yard, if you're trying to match your plaids, so that you have some extra fabric to work with. All right, now you can see on this one side of the front that I have finished the raw edge of the fabric and I have hemmed it back. So we're gonna go ahead and do that with this piece so that we can move forward with the side seams. So I'm gonna use a serger to finish the raw edge of the fabric, and then we'll fold it under and hem it. So if you don't have a serger, you can easily just zigzag your fabric to finish it and then hem it under, but I'm going to use the serger to finish it so that we don't have any fraying. Now, depending on your fabric, you may not even have to finish it. If you're using a knit fabric, generally you don't have to finish knit fabric, but for this flannel, you definitely want to go ahead and finish that edge. Okay, so now we have the edge of our fabric finished, and we're going to fold under. So we'll just pop over here, and I'm going to just grab a couple of clips here to fold under and secure so that when I sew, it's all held in place. And I'm folding back approximately a 1 inch. This will be our button facing. And again, with the plaid, you want to make sure that when you fold it back, you're keeping those lines straight. And sometimes the fabric wants to stretch a little bit, so make sure that you've got your markings lined up. Now I'm going to stitch on the right side of the fabric just so I can make sure that I'm doing a really nice straight stitch, because you are going to see this top stitching. And I'm just using a straight stitch to finish the top of this facing. And on my machine, it has a nice 1 inch mark. And so I'm using that to help guide my stitches as well. Using those lines on your machine is an excellent way to make sure that you're stitching straight, and especially when you're going to see this seam like we are on this one. All right, now when we get to the end, you can backstitch if you want, but because this seam will be encased in the waistband, you don't have to backstitch if you don't want to. All right, so now we have the other button facing, and you can see that you should have opposites of your skirt pieces here. And we will be overlapping those and adding the button on. So I like to just tack that in place with a clip to keep it all lined up as we sew the side seams. So now you're going to take your back piece and place it on top. And we're going to go ahead and just put a couple of pins or clips if you want to secure the side seams in place. And then we're going to take the serger and sew the side seams. You will notice that the front is wider than the back. That is okay. They won't line up perfectly. And if you want to, you can put some elastic in the waistband, or there's some different variations that you can play with to make sure you're getting a really good fit on your skirt. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and sew the side seams with the serger. All right, so taking your serger, you're going to trim off just a little bit. A 3/8 seam allowance is included in this pattern. And you want to make sure if you did use pins that you take those out as you're going along so that you don't sew over the pins. So if you don't have a serger, again, like we talked about with the button facing, you would want to sew this with a straight stitch on your sewing machine using a 3/8 seam allowance. And then I like to take a zigzag stitch and go over the raw extra part of that seam allowance to finish the edge, and that will also reinforce the seam as well. So you can do those two steps instead of using the serger if you don't have one. So it's very easy. You can sew this with a serger or without a serger, and you just have to adapt just a little bit depending on which machines that you're using. All right, so when we get to the bottom, we're gonna sew off. And again, with a serger, you're not back stitching. You're always just leaving a little bit of a tail on the edge of your seam. And now we have our skirt that's looking really good here. And let's talk about the waistband and the pocket. Okay, so I'm going to open up my skirt here because the next thing we're gonna do is add the pocket, and I've only cut one, so you can decide if you want one pocket or two pockets like you can see here on the examples, and where you would wanna place that. Now, I purposely cut the pocket with the plaid going on the diagonal so I wouldn't have to worry about matching it. It is definitely off, and it is off on purpose. So you can decide kind of what you want to do when you're matching your plaids or not matching your plaids. So you can, this is just a pocket. There were two pocket pieces. I sewed them together, turned it right side out, and I finished the top edge. And then we're going to pin it onto the fabric. So we're just trying to center it in the middle of the front. And again, you could decide if you wanted it on the left side or the right side. So that will be able to be stitched right on there. Now, let's talk about the waistband. So for this pattern, the waistband is a rectangle piece that then you will have to cut to be the right length. So I have a piece longer than I need. And we're going to go ahead and start by finishing one of the short ends. And to do that, we place the right sides together. And then I'm just going to go ahead and sew here. And then I will begin placing it on the skirt. And when we get close to this edge, I'll show you how we're going to determine the length of the other side. So let's finish the short end first, and then we'll begin placing it on the skirt. All right, so we're gonna sew this short end together, and that will get us started with finishing this. I am going to backstitch on this just to make sure this waistband stays exactly the way we want it. And then if you have a wide seam allowance and you want to trim it a little bit, you can, but essentially you're just going to then flip this right side out. And you can use your scissors or another blunt object to very carefully poke out the corner of the waistband, but you don't want that rounded. You want a nice square edge there. So then with right sides together, I'm going to begin pinning this to the waistband. And we will have 3 raw edges. One of the waistband or 2 of the waistband, and 1 of the skirt. And we're just gonna line up this edge, and then we're gonna go ahead and pin this all the way along. And because it's not really stretchy and it's just 2 straight edges, I don't need a lot of pins, but I do wanna make sure this kind of stays in place so that I don't lose where I'm sewing. So you're just lining up your edges, putting a few marking pins. And again, this is too long, but we are going to finish the other end of the waistband when we get closer to it. So don't worry if it's not matched up. All right, now I'm going to sew this on with a serger just because I think it looks nicer, and then we don't have to worry about finishing that raw edge. So let's move over to the serger, and we will go ahead and sew the edge together. And it's a little bit thick here because we have several layers of fabric. So as you get started, you might want to move a little bit slower and just get it all lined up as you're moving into it. These seams will all be on the inside, so it's not super important that your thread is perfectly matching, but usually you want something that won't stand out too much apart from your fabric. And then again, just every once in a while, double check that you're sewing all 3 layers of the fabric. And if you need to readjust, you can go ahead and do that. And this is just a straight waistband. So we didn't do anything curved. We didn't add side seams. It's just a single rectangle piece that we're using as our side seam. All right, so now I'm within a few inches of the end of my waistband, and I'm actually going to remove it from the serger, and we're going to go back over to the sewing machine to finish the end. And I do this just to make it easier to get a perfect fit. So you can see now that it's really easy to determine where we need to sew, but what we also need to do is we need to flip it back the reverse direction. So I'm going to turn it backwards. Well, first maybe if I marked it. So I'm going to take a pin and mark where I want to turn it, and I'm just going to mark on 1 layer of the flannel. Then I will turn it right side out. Okay, so we have our wrong sides or our right sides together. We're going to stitch. Now this will be the other side of that waistband. Back stitch. And we'll take it off. Okay, and then we can go ahead and clip off all this extra fabric and turn it right side out. You're going to go ahead and, again, just gently poke out that corner. And then we're going to match that up and finish sewing it over here on the serger. Okay, so you're just going to take the edge and pick up where you left off. And then, of course, we want the ends to match as perfectly as possible on our waistband. All right, let's head back to the table and look at our final steps. Okay, so you can see here we've got the waistband sewed, we have our pocket pinned, and we definitely need to hem it. So those are things we'll complete in the next segment. We're going to go ahead and hem it, and then you can see here we have our button front facing completed, and we will be showing you how to make buttonholes and sew buttons on in our next segment.